friends, it's Miss Jenny, and I'm going to read one of our stories of the week for you, and it's about ducks. It's called Make Way for Ducklings by Robert McCloskey, and it's a really good book because it has an award symbol right here called the Caldecott, and that means the author did a really good job and everybody likes this book. And if you can see straight above me, I have a duck in my office. And I want you to pay attention this week because that duck might show up in the treehouse and you'll have to find it and tell me. So let's read our story called Make Way for Ducklings. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were looking for a place to live. But every time Mr. Mallard saw what looked like a nice place, Mrs. Mallard said it was no good. There were sure to be foxes in the woods or turtles in the water, and she was not going to raise a family where there were foxes and turtles. So on they flew. When they got to Boston, they felt too tired to fly any further, and there was a nice pond in the public garden with a little island on it. The very place to spend the night, quacked Mr. Mallard, so down they flapped. That duck right there, that's a mallard too, because it has a green head. The daddy ducks have green heads. Next morning, they finished their breakfast in the mud at the bottom of the pond, but they didn't find much. See how they tip their heads down and their bottoms go up to eat in the pond? Just as they were getting ready to start on their way, a strange, enormous bird came by. It was pushing a boat full of people, and there was a man sitting on its back. "Good morning," quacked Mr. Mallard, being polite. The big bird was too proud to answer, but the people on the boat threw peanuts in the water, so the Mallards followed them all around the pond and got another breakfast, better than the first. I think they think that this is the big bird. Let's listen. "I like this place," said Mrs. Mallard as they climbed out on the bank, waddling along. "Why don't we build a nest and raise our ducklings right in this pond? There were no foxes and no turtles, and the people feed us peanuts." "What could be better?" "Good," said Mr. Mallard, delighted that at last Mrs. Mallard found a place that was suited. "But—" "Look out," squawked Mrs. Mallard. "You'll get run over." And when she got her breath, she added, "This is no place for babies. With all those horrid things rushing about, we must look for somewhere else." The kid on the bike scared the ducks. So they flew over Beacon Hill and round the State House, but there was no place there. They looked in Louisburg Square, but there was no water to swim in. Then they flew over the Charles River. "This is better," quacked Mr. Mallard. "That island looks like a nice, quiet place, and it's only a little way from the public garden." "Yes," said Mrs. Mallard, remembering the peanuts. "That looks like the right place for our ducklings." So they chose a cozy spot among the bushes near the water, and they settled down to build their nest. And only just in time, for now they were beginning to molt. All the old wing feathers started to drop out, and they would not be able to fly until new ones grow in. That's an interesting word, the word molt. But of course, they could swim, and one day they swam over to the park on the river bank, and there they met a policeman called Michael. Michael had fed them peanuts, and after that, the Mallards called on Michael every day. There's Michael the policeman. After Mrs. Mallard laid 8 eggs in the nest, she couldn't go visit Michael anymore because she had to sit on her eggs to keep them warm. She moved off the nest only to get a drink of water, or to have her lunch, or to count the eggs to make sure they were all there. There's 8 duck eggs in the nest. They're going to become ducklings. One day the ducklings hatched out. First came Jack, then came Cack, and then came Lack, and Mack, and Knack, and Quack, and Pack, and Quack. Mr. and Mrs. Mallard were bursting with pride. There was a great responsibility to take care of so many ducklings and to keep them so busy. The names all rhyme. One day, Mr. Mallard decided to take a trip to see what the rest of the river was like further on. So off he set. "I'll meet you in a week in the public garden," he quacked over his shoulder. "Take good care of the ducklings. Don't you worry," said Mrs. Mallard. "I know all about bringing up children." And she did. Look at those babies. She taught them how to swim and dive. She taught them how to walk in a line, to come when they were called, and to keep a safe distance from bikes and scooters and other things with wheels. That sounds like things you guys need to learn and are learning. When at last she felt perfectly satisfied with them, she said one morning, "Come along, children, and follow me." Before you could wink an eye, Jack, Clack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Whack, Pack, and Quack fell into line just as they had been taught. Mrs. Mallard led the way into the water, and they swam behind her to the opposite bank. There they are, all swimming in a row. And they waded ashore and waddled along till they came to a highway. Mrs. Mallard stepped out to cross the road. Honk, honk went the horns on the speeding cars. Quack went Mrs. Mallard as she tumbled back again. Quack, quack, quack went Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack, just as loud as their little quackers could quack. The cars went speeding by and honking, and Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings kept right on quack, quack, quacking. They made such a noise that Michael came running with his arms out and blowing a whistle. There's the policeman, Michael, coming to help them, I think. He planted himself in the center of the road, and he raised one hand to stop the traffic and then beckoned with the other, the way policemen do, for Mrs. Mallard to cross over. He's helping them to cross the street. As soon as Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings were safe on the other side and on their way to Mount Vernon Street, Michael rushed back to his police booth. He called Clancy at headquarters and said, "There's a family of ducks walking down the street." And Clancy said, "A family of what?" "Ducks," yelled Michael. "Send a police car quick." Meanwhile, Mrs. Mallard had reached the corner bookshop and turned onto Charles Street with Jack, Cack, Lack, Mack, Knack, Whack, Pack, and Quack all marching in line behind her. There they are. Everyone stared. An old lady from Beacon Hill said, "Isn't it amazing?" The man who swept the street said, "Well, now, isn't that nice?" And Mrs. Mallard heard them. She was so proud she tipped her nose in the air and walked with a little extra swing in her waddle. She's proud to take her babies for a walk. When they came to the corner of Beacon Street, there was the police car with 4 policemen that Clancy had sent from headquarters. The policemen held back the traffic so that Mrs. Mallard and the ducklings could cross the street. There they go. They're going to cross the street. Right back to the public garden. Inside the gate, they all turned around to say thank you to the policeman. And the policeman smiled and they waved back. They made it to the garden. When they reached the pond and swam across the little island, there was Mr. Mallard waiting for them, just as he had promised. Here he is, waiting for his family. The ducklings liked the new island so much that they decided to live there. All day long they followed and swam. They followed the boats, swam, and ate peanuts. And when night fell, they swim to their little island and they go to sleep. There they are. There's the daddy duck. The mallard. Remember, the dads have the green heads. The end. That was Make Way for Ducklings. And remember, keep your eye out for the duck that's behind me and see where he may show up at the treehouse. Have a great week.